Hi, everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of The Benchmark, looking at agricultural volatility and issues. This month, I am joined by Aled Thomas, who is a principal analyst with the retail and manufacturing team. I'm Peter Storey, head of prices for food and agricultural commodities. Aled, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you, Peter. Looking forward to Christmas.
Aren't we all? Aren't we all? So, as you say, we're at Christmas time, end of the year, basically. So I thought we'd look at some of the key issues which have dominated 2025, but also look into 2026 and what we might be expecting. So, starting with the protein space, I wanted to talk about two main issues. One, animal disease, just because it seems like we've had a year of quite a lot of it, quite frankly, in the US at the start of 2025. We were really beginning the year with astronomical egg prices due to bird flu outbreaks. And now we're closing the year, and very recently there's been an outbreak of African swine fever in Spain, which is closing off many export markets for them. But I also wanted to drill down a little bit on beef herd sizes. Seems like we're at historically low levels, or have been this year for many countries. And still not really much sign of prices coming down anytime soon. So just starting with the disease outbreaks, what really dominated 2025 in terms of the outbreaks? And is this like prevalence, I suppose you would say, of the outbreaks the new normal?
Well, 2025 was a really interesting year actually because we had not just one which dominated the scene. We had a plethora of them, as you said, African swine fever, highly pathogenic avian influenza. We had cases of blue tongue. All of these going on at the same time. Newcastle disease, of course, which is another one of poultry. All of these happening at different places across the globe and sometimes the same places has caused quite a significant issue in the supply chain in general. Not only because governments really can cope with one disease outbreak at a time, let alone several different disease outbreaks and all the sort of biosecurity risks that come with them that need to be followed. But they certainly have dominated 2025 in a different way completely. A lot of these diseases, as we said, certainly the highly pathogenic avian influenza or bird flu and African swine fever, because they're notifiable diseases, what it essentially means is if you find one animal on the farm with that disease, you have to essentially kill the whole herd to make sure that the spread is stopped as rapidly as possible. And that does then have a significant effect on the herd sizes, as we'll come on to a little bit later, but of course then the supply chain, because when producing things like poultry, your sort of bounce back after getting a disease can be quite quick because the growing period is very small. But when you're talking about things like pigs and beef, of course, sometimes the steak you eat today was born sort of around 4 years ago, so it's very hard
Takes
to
time,
plan that supply chain. One thing that is, not to add any concern to anyone out there who's watching, looking forward to their Christmas dinner, there is some bird flu about at the moment in Europe, of course, and there has been some on turkey farms. So that is always the worry around the Christmas time, that spread could cause some significant disruptions, particularly in things like turkey. But the US was significantly hit. It has come down much, it's much lower. The outbreaks now are really slowing up, and there's a kind of smaller here and there outbreaks as opposed to sort of the large ones we were seeing, which were causing the egg prices to skyrocket.
Of course, and prices are now ballpark where they were, a good year or so ago.
Yeah, I mean, they've certainly, the volatility is much less. There is always that seasonal upticks and downturns as we would not normally see, but I wouldn't say that HPAI bird flu is dominating the US scene as much as it previously was if we would have done this podcast a year ago. But it has certainly had a impact in terms of raising the floor of what prices would be.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Aled. And just looking to 2026 on that particular issue, is this the new normal? Are we likely to see just a high prevalence of these sorts of issues going forward? And if so, why would that be?
I think it's definitely a possibility. We do see these kind of diseases come and go through the years. It's not like that. This year is anything special in comparison to what we've seen maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But it does seem that these outbreaks are happening more often than historically before. that could be because we are just better at actually finding them and reporting about them, rather than 10, 15 years ago the reporting mechanisms weren't there to do it, and it was probably there at a low level, but we just weren't seeing it. So we do need to take it perhaps with a little pinch of salt in terms of how it's going to impact the market, but certainly kind of the warmer, wetter weather that a lot of places are seeing is a real risk to the transfer of disease, because that is where bacteria and funguses, etc., can thrive. So I don't think there's any suggestion, or there's certainly no feeling in the market at the moment that 2026 is going to be any worse than this year. The hope is, I think, that 2025 was one of the worse years than we've had in recent years. So we should be on a downhill at the moment, and cleaning up the animal diseases. But with everything, you never know. It only takes one animal or one kind of disease to go to the wrong farm, and it can flare back up again.
Absolutely, and yeah, hopefully that downtrend does continue, as you say. So then, yeah, just slightly pivoting to beef herd sizes. Certainly seems like, well, as you say, animal disease has been a factor there. But what else has been at play, which has rendered quite a lot of international beef herd sizes just unusually small?
Yeah, it isn't it. There is some elements of beef farmers, or cattle farmers, we could say, to put it more generic, switching between dairy production and beef production. Dairy prices have also been very good in recent months, but have now started to dip off somewhat. So people moving between those is sometimes causing a bit of an issue in the market. But certainly beef prices have been so high recently. It's not just the actual price of the beef carcass, but of course the cost to the farmer of replacing a beef mother cow, then a beef cow, as you would say, rather than a heifer, is significantly high. So we're finding that farmers aren't able to have a higher replacement rate, which means the herd sizes are also getting smaller as well.
I guess, as you were saying, the beef that you might have on your plate today, it was born 4 years ago. So I guess, just pivoting again towards 2026, it's unlikely that we'll see a big bounce back in herd sizes, would you say, or is it still possible?
It's possible to see a bounce back, but certainly not a big bounce back. It would take some significant timing to actually get that herd size bigger, and of course, typically beef farmers don't always use, or beef farmers who reproduce beef cows don't typically use sexed semen, so you could have a very low amount of replacement heifers in your herd. So if farmers were to switch to having sort of sexed semen, it means that every calf that they produce was a breeding heifer, then they could replace them very quickly. But I don't think the economics, even though beef prices are incredibly high, particularly on farm at the moment, I don't think the economics are quite there behind it to push them to use that. So we will see a bounce back. With the high prices, people are definitely going to want to see a move into the beef market, while the dairy market is now hitting sort of some significant lows, particularly paid to farmers. I know there's been several rate cuts in the price paid for milk in the past couple of weeks and months, so people will shift towards beef, which is high, but I don't think we'll see anything spectacular in 2026 in terms of bounce backs in herd sizes.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Aled. And then moving on to crops, I think it's undeniable to say that in terms of major crop commodities, cocoa has been the most volatile product of the year, and indeed possibly the past 2 or 3 years, just due to production shortfalls. But really in 2025, it's been a bit of a, I suppose you could say, a bit of a turning point, just because I think the market's been a bit more optimistic, perhaps, with regards to output, and obviously demand even is a bit reduced. So prices have dropped off, I would say, on the whole in 2025. It has, not been steady per se, but it certainly has been. Prices are much lower now than they were a year ago, certainly. So what exactly is the situation now with cocoa, Aled, and what's the situation looking like for 2026?
Yeah, prices are coming down. I think, like you said, demand is coming down, but of course we are seeing it certainly on a food retail level, that chocolate prices are incredibly high. They've been really driving food inflation, not just here in the UK, but also in the US. and Europe, which so people are obviously trying to cut back as much as they physically can. I know it's a tough task cutting back on chocolate, but trying to cut back on it. But as you said, the past couple of years, production for cocoa has been pretty wild. It's been up and down, but we are looking to see a more positive production in 2026, which is now bringing those prices down, particularly in Ivory Coast. Although arrivals have been slow so far, the weather is falling into near ideal conditions at the moment for production. So the assumption is that we'll have a boost to production in 2026, which will really help those prices ease off. Now, how long that sort of takes to reflect through the market could be some time, but certainly looking at futures, etc., it is looking like things are easing off there.
Thanks, Aled. And I guess a lot of companies, manufacturing companies of chocolate products, have perhaps just fiddled with the recipe a little bit to try to ease the price increases on consumers. I mean, is that definitely something that we've been seeing? And looking again to 2026, do we think that chocolate companies could reverse that, or once the cocoa content has come down, it's probably not likely to come back up, even if the prices have dipped?
Yeah, I think there's certainly an element to that, and I think you see a lot of countries now as well are trying to look at reducing sugar content in items sold on the supermarket shelves and adding taxes, etc. We of course have them here in the UK, but places like Mexico are upping their rates as well to try and encourage people to reduce the sugar that are in either drinks, but also other food items as well. I think one thing that has certainly impacted the market this year and the past couple of years, which producers are constantly thinking about but never sure what to do, is the EU deforestation regulations, which up until 2 or 3 weeks ago they were going to have to implement them this December, and all of a sudden now again that's been rolled back another 12 months. So I think realistically the thing to watch again in 2026, I'm pretty sure I said the same thing this time last year and the year before near enough, was are the EU going to really implement that EU DR rules, the deforestation regulation rules, because that is going to be one of the key things, particularly on this continent, on how food producers and food manufacturers source and produce kind of their chocolate-based items, because that could really impact where they're going to get their product from in the future and ultimately change the market dynamics for good.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much on that front, Aled. And then lastly, I just wanted to briefly cover the, arguably the biggest story of the year in terms of trade, which is naturally tariffs. I won't go into a big long spiel about the tariffs that came in April from the US and all of the retaliatory tariffs which have ensued. It's a story which has had a lot of ink spilled over it. But I mean, what exactly how would you sum up the year in terms of where we're at now, and what's the state of play going into 2026?
Yeah, it certainly has been a volatile year. I think we've spoken about tariffs at almost every vodcast that you and I have done together since the announcement, of course, back in April. And there has certainly been some big market shifts, not only because we saw some front loading in the first half of the year then of people trying to get away from those tariffs, but also the way people are buying items and food and drink items to get around the tariffs in expectation that they might come down next year, because the tariff is only paid in the US once it leaves its bond in the ports, etc. So you could essentially buy without paying the tariff and then hope that Donald Trump gets rid of it and then sort of release the item from its bond without too much disruption to the market. But we are now starting to see the easing off of some of these tariffs. I think we're going to continue to see that, I think, going into 2026. There are some complaints around things like nuts. They were promised, I think, the tariffs would go a bit lower, but seem to have been kept much higher than expected. But the reality is, again, uncertain. We don't know. A lot of things can change. Tariffs are clearly being used currently as big political tools rather than economic levers, as they should realistically be used for. But the market seems to have made its peace with tariffs at the moment, and there doesn't seem to be the volatility that was expected, certainly at the start of the year.
Okay, well, thank you very much for those insights, Aled, and indeed for all of your insights that you provided today. And thank you at home, in the office or on the commute, for watching, and hopefully catch you again in 2026.